Hello, welcome back to my channel. Um, I just finished this book today, finally, and I loved it. This is This Earth of Mankind by Pramoedya Ananta Toer, an Indonesian writer. And this book is quite well known in Indonesia. I think it is considered as some kind of classic. And after finishing it, I could certainly see why that is so, because I enjoyed it immensely. I actually started reading this book more than 2 months ago, and but because of time constraints, I was not able to finish it. But even at that time, when I first started reading this, a few chapters in this book, I already expected that I would like this book, maybe at least 4 stars. And at the end, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. So it was a really enjoyable reading experience. I just finished it a few hours ago on the train. So, yep, that was awesome. So this is a historical fiction, and it is actually a part of a quartet. Uh, and because of, I would say, the relative popularity of this book among bookish people here in Malaysia, it was kind of difficult for me to find an affordable or used version of this book, because whenever this book came up somewhere, in used bookstores, it would immediately be gone, like, you know very very quickly. And oftentimes I would not have the chance to actually buy this book, but I was really fortunate to be able to get this copy. So yeah, that was great. What is this book about? This novel centers around a a teenager named Minka, and this book, the story is set around the time when Indonesia was under the rule of Dutch colonizers. And so we have the story's protagonist Minka, who is Javanese, but he comes from a fairly high-standing family, and because of that, he's able to attend a rather elite Dutch school, and he's just kind of like one of the few native Indonesian who attend that school, with the other students being people, or kids of some European or Dutch ancestry. So already we are seeing a character who is sort of like out of place, considering his background. Now, at the beginning, we see how this character, being a student of an elite Dutch school, he has a certain level of admiration towards the Dutch people and also Dutch culture, who was the colonizer of Indonesia at the time. But he has this kind of naive ideas about the Dutch, basically. And this story, as we will later see, is kind of like his realization, his discovery that things are not as it seems to him. So he would eventually learn about the reality of colonization, and how he ends up learning about this is really interesting as well. Very important to this book is a romance plot. Now, how does this romance plot start? So we have our protagonist Minka. One day he accompanies his friend to a house of a wealthy Dutch man, and for a particular reason, right? So he accompanies his friend, and there he ends up meeting two important characters. So the first character he ends up meeting at that house is the concubine of this wealthy Dutchman, and this concubine is a native, and her name is Nyai Ontosoro. And then the protagonist, Minka, encounters Nyai Ontosoro's daughter named Anneliese, and instantly he forms some kind of bond with these two characters, this woman and also her daughter. And he, at that time, just kind of falls in love with the daughter, and the daughter also has mutual feelings for him as well. So this is how the romance plot kind of begins. Now, what's really important in this romance plot is the background, or the backgrounds of each of these characters. So you have Minka, the protagonist, and also Nyai Ontosoro, the concubine. These two characters are natives, whereas Anneliese, the love interest in here, is mix of native and also Dutch European. So this element is going to be super important in here, because during this period of Dutch colonization, the people who live in the East Indies are just kind of like, they live in this sort of stratified society in which the natives are considered like low ranking, and then after that you have the Indos. Basically it's kind of like the Indo-Europeans who are there, and then on the top you have like the pure-blooded Europeans. And so there is this kind of levels or strata that people can find themselves in depending on their background, their ethnicity background. And this is going to present some kind of conflict into this romantic plot line. And it is through this kind of like this romance, and also further conflicts are going to arise. Now, I feel like if I say that this book has a very central focus on a romantic plot line, many people will probably be turned off by it, but I would say that this book is not a romance. It's historical fiction. And I feel like the romance is woven very well into the narrative. Because the romance highlights the kind of social issues that the characters have to face at that time, particularly the protagonist. So it's not just something that is, I would say, very predictable, or something that one can expect to be kind of fluffy. At many points in this book, the novel can become kind of heavy, and there are parts in which the novel does in fact go into a more violent territory. So there's that. A little bit of trigger warning. There may also be some kind of sexual violence being written into this book, although not very graphic, but there are elements of that in the plot line as well. Now there's the first thing that I thought was really interesting about this book is how stylish I think it is. And now I when I was reading this book, I later learned that this book apparently had a very interesting origin. This book sort of came out when the author was a political prisoner in Indonesia, sometime in the 70s, I think. And he actually narrated the story orally to other inmates at the time, before the story was actually put onto paper. Like, before he was arrested, his works have been destroyed. So when he was in prison, he just narrated the story of this novel to his inmates, so that the story could sort of survive, in case there were no manuscripts to be produced. But after he got out, the story was written down on paper, and that's how we ended up getting this. So the Indonesian version was published in 1980, and then the English translation by Max Lane was it came out in 1990. Now, the style of this novel is just really interesting. At first glance, it's written in this really conversational tone. It was this book is narrated through the point of view of the main character, Minka. So we get a first-person point of view of things, which is fairly limited, but because of that, we are able to hear a lot of Minka's thoughts, his feelings, and all that. And because of that, there is a certain kind of I would say interesting flavor, or flavor, I think would be the nice word, because this book has a particularly has a narrative that feels like some kind of heroic story, right? And when I say it has the feel of a heroic story, I'm not talking about like how the narrator always kind of reimagines himself as this big hero, but it has a certain kind of taste of epic to it, as if the main character is someone who is tasked with really big responsibility of representing his people, saving his people, sort of that. There's this very minor feel of messianic calling that can be associated with this character, except for the fact that instead of using like physical weapons to fight off the enemy, we have the main character being written as someone who is really talented in words, in writing. So the weapon is kind of like the pen and paper. And in fact, much of the so-called troubles and conflicts in this book are in fact being fought by the main character using words, using writings, using the pen. And a lot of those conflicts are related to sort of like his situation, his relationship that he has with this concubine, and also the concubine's daughter. And related to that, I also feel like there are a lot of elements of heroic, like something related to knighthood, royalty, kingliness in this book. The main character has a particularly interesting origin. His family, even though he's native, his family is of a high standing, and he apparently was described as descendants of important people. And because of that, he is often addressed, especially by his mom, but also some other characters in this book, as someone who is descended from a very important lineage. And that just kind of lends a bit of this, I would say, royal aura to this character, which kind of elevates his importance, not only as a character but also some kind of literary symbol in this book. So I think that's kind of interesting as well. And associated with that, we have this main character's journey that he reluctantly accepts. Like, at the beginning we see how he admires the colonizers, but gradually and reluctantly he begins to see that the reality around him is changing as he learns more and more about his surrounding. And so that kind of makes the story becomes like some kind of a reluctant hero story, and eventually it would become like a full-fledged hero with a big fight kind of a narrative. So yeah, there is that kind of element that feels a little bit like very European, very Western, and also combine that with the fact that the character is of Javanese origin, and not only just Javanese origin but also aristocratic royal Javanese origin. So those two combinations just kind of give this character this very interesting heroic aura. Now the second part, not the second part, the second aspect that I find really great about this book is that how certain female characters in here are written. So we have a few characters that we can really describe as very interesting, strong female characters. Now, of course, the first one is the concubine, Nyai Ontosoro, who is written as someone super capable, super intelligent, super talented, and her motivation in this book is to ensure that her daughter has a life that she could not have, being a concubine herself, and we would later learn about her story in here. So she's kind of driven by this sort of simmering anger towards her own fate. But we also encounter many other characters in this book. We have Minka's teacher at school named Magda Peters, which I personally find super interesting. She is written as different from other Dutch people in the sense that she believes in the freedom of the natives of the colonized countries. And so she is described as a liberal. That's kind of like her one of her main characterization. And on top of that, she is also very supportive of Minka. So that kind of sets her apart from many other Dutch characters in this book. We also have Minka's friend, who are children of some important officials in the ruling government. Their names are Sarah and Miriam. They don't have a big role in this book, but they eventually, I would say, have some really important, small but really important role in Minka's development as a character, basically acting as his friend, so to speak. And what's really interesting about these characters are they're very central to the main character, and they're all women, and at the same time they all act as some kind of mentor characters to the main character, which I thought is just really fascinating. So there is this kind of like duality in this book. We on one hand we have the reality of colonization, and also associated with that is the war, which is very masculine in nature. And then we have around this character teacher, mentor figures who are female. And therefore there's a certain kind of like feminine vibes associated with the molding of this character, yeah, which I thought is just kind of interesting. But one thing that is a bit different in terms of how female characters are written in here is the love interest Anneliese. Now, she tends to get written as someone who is prone to depression, very sickly, dainty, fragile. And so she kind of, at first glance, have this very stereotypical, dainty, lady-like quality, like someone who is kind of clingy and all that. We would later learn more about why she's like that. So at least her character is going to be fleshed out. But comparing her with other female characters in this book, her characterization just feels very different from other female characters, which makes this, which makes her presence in this book feel kind of jarring. So jarring, in fact, that I think, and this is something that I just, I would say I subconsciously have this in my head, that she feels almost ethereal in the sense that her function in the story, she's not just the love interest, but I can't help but feel that she's more than that. She probably represents some kind of idea or concept related to the colonization of Indonesia by the Dutch at that time. Like, what could she possibly represent? I feel like she very likely represents something because of just how ethereal her character seems in this book. And the fact that the main character is sort of written as this kind of like king, heroic, messianic figure, very mildly veiled, but still you can feel it. Coupled with this fact, the character of Anneliese just feels even more ethereal. And because of this quality of her character, she just seems very different. Like, it reminds me of Remedio's The Beauty in 100 Years of Solitude. Like, you have a character who is described as like super beautiful, and in fact Anneliese is written as someone who is super beautiful, so beautiful, who can complement the heroic adjacent, and also described as really handsome a few times, the protagonist Minka. Yeah, so that's a very interesting aspect that I noticed. I'm not sure if you guys, those of you who have read this book, have any thoughts on that. Yeah, aside from those things, yeah, as a whole, I just thought that this book has a very interesting plot. It became really propulsive towards the end. Obviously, I'm not gonna say what the details of the plot, but the plot is written in such a way that it has tons of ups and downs. So there is a bit of a dramatic quality to that as well. In general, I think that this novel has a very cinematic quality. Place, the location is described in a way that makes it seem quite majestic, which is something that I notice in novels that deal with colonization. Often the place where the colonization occurs, often being described as something that is of great beauty, which kind of goes to further highlight the barbarity of colonization, right? And the extension of that place, the people, in this book are described as existing in various shades of morality, which makes the story even more interesting. But not just the people associated with the place. The people associated with the colonizers are also written in great range of morality as well, and values. And so as a whole, you get so many different kinds of characters in here. It is packed with people, or packed with characters of both sides, with tons of nuance, like delicious nuance. So I really enjoyed that as well. Yeah, and also don't forget, not to forget how dramatic this book can get sometimes. There are certain parts that can feel kind of soapy, which contributes to how propulsive the novel is. So anyway, I think that's all I'm gonna say about This Earth of Mankind. There are still 3 more books in the series, and that now I very much would like to read about, to read the rest of the quartet, because this book ends at a very interesting note. Okay. The ending was interesting. That's all I'm gonna say. But yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. Yep. If you have read this book, what did you think about it? Yeah, let me know in the comments. Did you like it or did you not like it? I've heard some great things about this. If you are interested in reading this book, yes, go read it. I am jamming it down your throat now. But yeah, other than that, I'll see you again in a different video. So until then, take care. Thanks for watching, and bye.